also being destroyed in any sense of a meeting of the minds. When was the last time you met the mind of the bank that you use? Or have you ever met the mind of Sears? Have you ever met the mind of an auto dealer? Freedom of contract is touted by conservatives in this country as one of the pillars of our democracy. And how much freedom of contract do we have when 99% of all contracts we'll ever sign have already been printed, and all we're told to do is to sign on the dotted line? And if we don't like the Ford dealer contract, and we, in a huff, walk out and say you're going to go to a GM dealer or a Toyota dealer, it's the same contract. The same for Allstate and State Farm. I was just asked to sign a waiver on the use of the videotape of this lecture. Do you see how many times I had to change everything? I was supposed to waive all liability, blanket waiving of all liability. Well, what if some fixture here fell on us or something? And it wasn't defined at all. And I said to the law student, who drafted this? Is this a good example for the law students? And it goes to your student loans. Do you know I have not met a law student administration yet in America that looked over the Sallie Mae contract, the student loan contract, for the last 25 years, and taken it apart and gone back to Sallie Mae and said, we're here to protect our law students, and in no way are we going to have our law students sign this kind of draconian, trapdoor-filled contract of adhesion. Now, if the administrators of the law school and their contract professors are not going to do that, you think the undergraduate administrators are going to do it? You think the administrators of medical schools and architect schools and business schools are going to do it? Of course not. This is the concept of a controlling process. A controlling process is a restriction on human freedom and opportunity and critical thinking in such a way that is so insidious that it isn't even seen as such, when it should be seen as such. It's hardly invisible. It's, shall we say, professionally excluded from the range of human inquiry. Now, you have a contracts course here. Is it a full year course? Contracts 1? Just a semester. Will somebody here tell me how many hours are devoted to contracts of adhesion in contrast to negotiated contracts between businesses and labor unions and so forth? Anybody tell me? Who's taking the contract course? Yeah, well, pick on NADER's Raiders.
That's more adhesion, not too much negotiation or bargaining, really.
Mostly is adhesion?
I mean, that's what it's geared towards. Are you talking about in reality, or?
No, in the course that you took.
I really didn't like my contract professor.
The usual answer is 1 or 2 classes, 1 or 2 hours. And the rest is unnegotiated. In fact, just look at the contracts book, right? Well, one answer to that criticism is, well, you know, there's not much intellectual content here compared to negotiated contracts, where there's a huge number of judicial decisions. There's not much intellectual content. Wrong. Think about it. Any kind of suppressive activity, the use of law as an instrument of oppression, has got to have intellectual content to it. It might not be the narrow content, but it's exactly what's necessary to expand your own education. So when you get out of school, you don't just sign on the dotted line. You start asking yourself, well, what if I don't sign on the dotted line? What if I get the auto dealer contract, and I ask the dealer for a chair, so I can read it before I buy the car, and I got my magnifying glass, so I look it over paragraph by paragraph, because, you know, Mommy and Daddy always told me never to sign anything that I didn't read. And you're sitting there, and there are things you don't like. So you cross out a paragraph here, double the warranty there, get rid of the compulsory arbitration clause that strips you from going to court, which no government can do, but judicially approved contracts of adhesion can take away from you, and you got all the, you put your initials in the margin, and then you get it all right, go back to the salesperson in the dealer room, and you say, here it is, sign on the dotted line. We wrote a book once called a owner's lemon owner's guide to lemon owners, and we had a pro-consumer contract at the end. Nice big type. Wasn't totally unfair to the seller by any means, but it gave the buyer, fairness. And we asked the people who bought the book to go back and tell us what experience is when they went into an auto dealer. And the first letter came back and said, the man goes into an auto dealer and he chooses the car and he slaps down the copy of this contract. And the salesman looks up and says, what's this? He said, well, I want to buy the car, and I'm giving you the convenience of a pre-printed contract. You like to sign. And the salesperson goes back to the manager behind the glass door, and the manager calls the police. See how you have a controlling process, and when you erupt it and give it visibility, what happens? There's a survey of law professors years ago, and they said, how many of you read the contracts, the printed contracts, the insurance contracts, and the landlord leases, and so on? And most law professors, they don't read it. And the understanding is, why read it? I mean, it's not exactly a competitive way of doing business, is it? You go to a competitor, you're going to get the same type of law, so why waste time reading it? And that, I think, tells you a lot about the need to revolutionize the law of contracts and to realize that while you can't, at the point of sale, get away with changing things unless you have a congenial vendor, that we can develop the facilities to organize people where these agreements are negotiated beforehand, the way labor management agreements are negotiated beforehand, where they sit around a hotel table or an office, big round table, and they negotiate the warranties, they negotiate the landlord leases, they negotiate the condominium leases, they negotiate the bank deposit cards, they negotiate the insurance policies, and so forth. And that's what we have to consider. An area that was never discussed at law school was federal chartering. Corporations, as you know, are created by government.